Committee. Good morning. We do have regrets from Councillor Harder. She will be here a little bit later into the meeting, and as a result, we're going to hold off on our Glad Cleaning the Capital Awards until Councillor Harder arrives. So we are going to get into the agenda, and then we'll pause the meeting once Councillor Harder arrives to do those awards. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, thank you very much. We have confirmation of the minutes 3 from the 4th of September 2009. Carried, thank you very much. We do have two communications response for inquiries. We have TRC 03-19 on road resurfacing.
Yeah, I have a question, comment for that.
Okay, so do we have consent from the committee to lift this item onto the agenda? Carried, okay. And we have TRC 04-19, Prince of Wales Bridge Transit. Councillor Kavanagh, this is your time. If you want to lift it, you do want to lift it. Is there consent from the committee to lift this onto the agenda? Okay, carried. And we have other communications. Memo started the negotiations to acquire the Beachburg and Walkley rail corridors. Councillor Menard would like to lift it quickly, so we'll put that at the end as well. Okay. I don't believe there's anything that we can go through on consent, and so we'll get into item number 1, options for traffic calming King Edward, north of Rideau Street, IPD, and we do have a number of speakers on this. The first speaker is John Woodhouse.
Should we maybe get a staff to come in?
Okay, and do we have staff available to come? Yeah, Vivi, Frank, thanks so much. Mr. Woodhouse, just before you begin, Ms. Chi and Frank, is there any information you'd like to present so that everyone is fully aware before we take delegations, or would you like to take delegations first?
Just set context.
Yeah. Councillor Fleury would like you to set the context, if you could, please.
Yes, so this is about King Edward and to narrow the outside curb lane from 4.5 down to 3.5. And we looked at options because we were asked to look into permanent traffic calming. So vertical measures were not appropriate, meaning speed humps, because this is a major arterial. And so with the latest neighborhood traffic calming guidelines that council approved, we try not to put such types of measures on arterials. So all that remained was to narrow the lanes. There were two options that were investigated, either widen the median, and then all the lanes would get shifted down to 3.5 meters. That's one option. It's the cheapest because it doesn't affect the drainage of the road. However, it does nothing to improve the public realm for this corridor. So the other option is to bring the outside curbs in, and that would provide 1 more meter of space for pedestrians, and that requires the relocation of the catch basins for drainage. Now, in all of these options, even at 4.5, this corridor is not suitable, or it's not a very nice environment for cycling because of the traffic volumes. And to bring all the lanes down to 3.5, there would be no opportunity to provide a safe or even any space for cyclists other than they're in the lane with the cars. So the time to implement cycling would be when we reach the ultimate state, the ultimate design for this road, and it's always been planned to go down to 4 lanes, and then we would have the space to build proper cycle tracks. Now, we can't do the 4 lanes now until we find a solution for the interprovincial truck traffic, and that's where we are right now. There's no money for the options that we've identified in this this response to the inquiry or to the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Chief, for setting the scene. Mr. Woodhouse, thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is John Woodhouse. I live on Colbert Street, which is on the east side of King Edward, which is the more residential side, as opposed to the market side of King Edward. I have lived in Lower Town for the past 40 years, and I've always found King Edward to be a no man's zone, or in fact, as I nickname it, it's the Berlin Wall between the two communities of Lower Town. And it really is, because a lot of the residential people on the east side fear crossing King Edward because of the number of trucks. And those trucks do not slow down for anyone or anything, not even the traffic lights. I try to avoid crossing at King Edward and Rideau, because that is a very dangerous spot where the trucks turn onto Rideau Street. It's very, very dangerous to even stand on the sidewalk there, because some of those 18-wheelers, they'll have 2 seconds left to go on the countdown, and they'll whip around that corner and onto Rideau Street as though it was nothing. And I usually cross at York and King Edward, where there is a stop sign. Traffic lights. Do they stop? No. The people going north on King Edward go right through the light, and they back up the whole traffic, so that it's bumper to bumper from stoplight to stoplight. And the only way that you can cross is if you weave in and out. If you weave in and out of the cars. It's a very frustrating place to not only transverse, but it's also a very, as was just mentioned by staff, it's not a very appealing street. And it used to have trees on it. Now it's just a big 6-lane highway. Well, I'm not too impressed by it, because it has not changed in 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woodhouse, any members of the committee have questions? No? Thank you very much
Okay.
for coming out this morning, as always.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Ana Maria Terez. Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes, and at 30 seconds, I'll try to get your attention so you know that we're getting close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, councillors. My name is Ana Maria, and I'm a resident of Lower Town. I own a home at the corner of St. Andrew and King Edward Avenue. The area of King Edward Avenue I'm concerned with is the residential portion of the avenue, which is north of St. Patrick and just before the ramp to go onto the bridge. As you're well aware, this is the only designated interprovincial truck route in Ottawa today, and 3,000 freight trucks drive on this avenue each day. About 20,000 vehicles use this avenue as part of their daily commute, And there are 3 wide lanes on this avenue that are straight in each direction. So there's 6 wide lanes that make the avenue look and feel like a highway right now. And it is effectively treated like an extension of the highway by the vehicles that go to the bridge to cross over to Quebec. So speeding is a problem on this avenue at all times, but especially, which might not be obvious, is during non-rush hour when there are not a lot of vehicles and there's not a lot of traffic. So when there's only a few cars on the avenue and you have 3 wide lanes, it's very, very easy to speed on this avenue. I sent some documents to Ms. Crozier this morning, and one of them shows a radar speed board measurement that was taken 2 years ago on a random summer day. And one of the highest speeds noted during a 10-hour period was about 90 kilometers an hour. So this is, any day of the week this can happen, and this does happen. So living conditions are very difficult for the residents of this avenue. There's families that live on this avenue, like my family. So my home is not directly on this avenue, but it still vibrates when freight trucks drive over sewer covers. So the vibrations are particularly bad when they speed and in the middle of the night. They wake me up at all times. In other cities, like in Toronto, there's noise bylaws that restrict transport trucks from driving at all hours of the day, but we don't have that in Ottawa. And many northbound vehicles start to accelerate when they see a green light at St. Patrick and St. Andrew, because they feel as though this is the last traffic light before they can hit the highway. So there's a lot of acceleration that happens in that area. Sometimes trucks sound like small planes taking off. It's just not normal living conditions. So I've personally spoken with about 50 residents in this area about this issue, and they all agree that the status quo is not acceptable. Measures must be put in place to constrain the speed of vehicles that drive above the 40-kilometer speed limit. When I first contacted the City of Ottawa about the noise and vibrations from the speeding vehicles, I was told that there's 40 or more measures already in place on that avenue to slow vehicles down. But during a meeting with transportation staff, they admitted that none of those measures work because effectively this avenue was designed for 50 kilometers an hour, and when the speed limit was reduced, there were no structural changes made. So presently, it is just 3 very wide lanes that are straight. So anyways, this avenue feels a bit like the Wild West of Ottawa traffic sometimes. There's red light cameras on this avenue, one for northbound and one for southbound traffic, and they flashed 3,000 times in 2016. So this is the most red light tickets given on any street in Ottawa. So this really just shows just how much speeding there is on that avenue. Vehicles can't slow down to stop. So the city transportation staff recommended narrowing the lanes of the right lane from 4.5 to 3.5 meters, but I believe this is just a first step in slowing vehicles down, especially during non-rush hours. So there's, if we narrow the lane, that's great, but during non-rush hour, it will still be 3 wide straight lanes with few cars on them, so there will still be a lot of speeding. I think other effective measures would be, for instance, using the third lane, making changes to the third lane to use it as it is meant to be, which is as a turning lane. So during a meeting with Phil Landry last March, he told us that the third lane needs to be there presently because it is a turning lane, and that avenue needs to have a turning lane in order for traffic not to back up. So if that's the case, if it needs to be a turning lane, then we can use it as a turning lane. So just couple other quick measures would be photo radar, if the province wants to implement that, and also implementing separator between the right lane and the other 2 lanes to make the right lane for local use only.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anna Maria, for your presentation. Are there any questions? Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wanted to follow up because obviously you only have a few minutes, and you're expressing what I hear often from our community relating to obviously the truck impact, but also speeding. I want to go maybe even more specific, which is north of Rideau, that curb lane that goes northbound, that really connects to Sussex, that acts as a speeding lane or an turning lane, as you described. Can you maybe define what's the issue with the current width and what sort of behavior you've seen, even with some of the traffic calming that have been put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I see is the third lane being 4.5 meters means that when vehicles are parked on the side there, which is normally between 7 in the morning and about 3 in the afternoon, there's vehicles parked on the right side in the third lane, but the width of the lane makes it such that there's still vehicles that can pass between the ones that are parked and the other 2 lanes to the left. So it's in a way creating 4 lanes, 3 lanes of vehicles and 1 lane for the parked vehicles. But I really do believe that if more effort is made, that third lane on the right could really be blocked off from flow-through traffic without having an impact on rush hour traffic. The third lane on the right turns to go to Sussex anyways, so there's a round point at the end of that third lane that vehicles take to get to. There's not a lot of vehicles that use that third lane to get all the way to Sussex, and most of them go into the left 2 lanes to go over the bridge. So by just putting in a measure to block off the end of that avenue, that third lane at the end of the avenue, that would really add a lot to slowing vehicles down and to using that lane as it is meant to be used.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming out this morning. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Peter Ferguson. Excuse me. Good morning, Mr. Ferguson. Thank you for coming. Good morning. You have 5 minutes, and I'll try to get your attention when there's 30 seconds left.
Good, thank you. I just want to make 5 points. The association thinks that the proposal is certainly worth going forward. Narrowing that right-hand lane will probably create some friction, possibly slowing down some drivers, obviously not all. We would really like more effective relief, longer-term relief, and we're hoping that the traffic master plan will reflect some interest in this, and the bigger picture, of course, getting trucks off out of the downtown core. We've had more than 5 decades of this kind of difficulty, and I really think that the step that's being proposed here, a first step, is well worth supporting. And finally, just a note, we got into some discussion about a tunnel. Unfortunately, we didn't get far enough into the discussion. An environmental assessment would have provided this committee with a lot of further food for thought about that option. It looks like we may have another bridge on the table as another option, but we really do need some substantive structural change on King Edward Avenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming out this morning. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Siobhan Cassidy. Thank you, Siobhan, for coming this morning. You have 5 minutes, and I will try to get your attention with 30 seconds left to let you know it's time to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I'm a longtime resident of Lower Town. As a matter of fact, I was born in Lower Town, and I remember when there was the boulevard and it was 2 lanes either way ending in Sussex. That was then, this is now. I would speak in favor of some limited traffic calming, eliminate the, where even though catch basins have to be changed, yes, it's a capital expense, but you actually have to sometimes spend money to make places livable. Because Lower Town has been used as, like, King Edward Avenue, the Berlin Wall, I think I actually came up with that one, has been used as the speedway. City staff, I believe, mentioned the possibility of the cyclists. Well, if you're a cyclist and you're on King Edward Avenue at any time, if you don't have your head examined, you soon will have an MRI. Because nobody in his right mind would take a bicycle down King Edward Avenue. As far as the interprovincial trucks, who cares? It's called Autoroute 50. Take it from Montreal to Hull, deal with it. Because I literally, when I was coming here today, I saw not only a tractor trailer, but it was a tandem. And I'm looking, oh God, no. So I'm sorry, I'm 63 years old. I have lived in Lower Town all my life, and I am tired of what was once a street, decent arterial street, Main Street, being used as a speedway and a freight transport lane. If it's going to be inconvenient to the little darlings crossing the Hull, who cares? And that's basically my point.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Siobhan? No. Thank you very much for
Thank you very
coming out.
much.
For coming out this morning. We don't have any other public delegations. Are there any questions for staff from members of the committee? Councillor Fleury.
Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, I'd love to maybe set out the context and then ask questions to staff. As you might have heard from some speakers, there's the specific issue of the interprovincial truck route, which all of us at committee are quite aware. I'll simplify it for everyone in my mind. If the feds want a bridge, they should pay for it. If the feds don't do a bridge, then the province should pay to correct the missing link between the 417 and an interprovincial crossing, which is the Ministry of Transportation's responsibility. I'll just set that out so that we can move on and pursue those conversations that were in the right context. We're faced with a situation that King Edward was fully completed in 2010. That was prior to the LRT being approved. And as the LRT began to roll in terms of approvals, we also began a program that was called Downtown Moves. Downtown Moves looked at lanes that are along Albert and Slater for what would be their condition today once the LRT is up and running and those buses are off the corridor. The weird anomaly in this is STO, because STO is not specific to those bus changes, yet we know that at some point before April 2020, because Rideau Street will be closed to finish the construction between Dell and Sussex, that they'll need to be properly integrated at Lion Station. So that means that the majority of STO buses the majority goes southbound. They hang out at Union right behind Global Affairs and make their way to make their time point on Rideau, Wellington currently. That changes once STO is properly integrated at Lion. So you have lanes that are really bus lanes on King Edward, those curb lanes north and southbound, north of Rideau, that are way too wide. Staff recognize it. We have Phil Andrew in the room. Phil and I have worked together ever since I've been elected to put in traffic calming measures. And Anna Maria is right. They're only a patchwork of strategies. So one of the key ways, without resolving the trucks, but to start making it feel more normal as a street, is to bring the right measurement of that curb lane, both north and southbound. So then off-peak, cars can park. They own the lane. There's no people driving through the lane, which is happening currently. And on peak, you're not allowing a speeding environment, because what happens is that lane is so wide that it almost acts as an on-ramp to the bridge, where people want to pass each other and they pass on the right side rather than being in the two curb lanes. So I guess my question to staff would be the following. what were the thought process relating to not including it in the downtown moves? And my second question would be, in the environment of STO shifting their services to Lion, what do we believe to be the right approach for the correction, like we're doing for Albert and Slater, for an avenue like King Edward?
Chair, as we mentioned in our response to the motion, we did look at downtown moves to see if there was some applicability of including King Edward into that program, and it doesn't seem to apply. Because for downtown moves, actually, it's not being funded through light rail or any other program. It is a strategy looking at how we can repurpose Albert and Slater. The funding for Albert and Slater is coming from a renewal work, so there was an opportunity there to throw in some money from the cycling program to bring Albert and Slater into a complete street with proper cycling facilities. So that's being done that way. Whereas King Edward is not scheduled for any renewal work in the near future, so there's no funding from that aspect. Your second question was about what do we do once STO leaves. Well, this is the concept plan that we had provided for you in terms of what we can do to narrow the lanes. So really the issue here is about funding. So the cost is $4 million for that option 2, where we bring the outside curbs in.
Okay, and one of the speakers just talked about the infractions, or the volume of infractions for red light camera. Are we not able to use some of those, like almost that as a levy, to pay for those types of corrections?
The red light camera revenue goes to the police services, and I think Mr. Landry will talk more about that.
Future Councillor Landry?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Today, the red light camera revenues go back to general revenues at the city. And in terms of allocating funds to that, I would have to leave to finance to potentially respond in more detail.
Is finance here today?
I'll endeavor to reach out to them and touch base with you after our meeting.
Okay. And then could you explain to me, I'm not sure if I'm sure you're aware, but I'm not sure if it's under your authority, but when we redo transit ways or when we do transit-specific corrections, how is that funded? So unlike when we do roads, you talked about the renewal for downtown moves or the funding for Albert Slater, but the specifics of capital funding for transit, how's that established?
Transit is funded through the transit program, and those are the projects where we're putting in a facility in to improve transit service. So in this case, I don't know if it applies because it was not set up for transit other than the STO buses were operating in the lane. Transit is funded through the gas tax as well, some DCs, but that's the funding background for that program.
Okay. So what's your advice to committee today on how to fund a program like that?
Chair, as in our response to the motion, we're at a loss as to, we looked at different options, but really it is, we would have to get direction from council on this because we looked at all the other programs to see if they apply and we cannot find a source.
Okay, my last question on this is, so Phil, you'll endeavor to get me the answers relating to the revenue for the red light, but Vivi, today we're receiving a report. Can you maybe define what's the status of that report? Because I want to make sure that, okay, today we don't have the money for it. We have a plan that the community endorses, that you see the benefit of, and you're bringing forward. What's its status after today if it's not funded?
It's a plan that sits there on the shelf, and as soon as we get the go-ahead or the direction from council to proceed with it, once the funding source is identified, then we will proceed with the proper designs and broader consultation, the normal way of implementing a project.
Okay, so I'll endeavor to find funding sources, hopefully ahead of council, but if not, we'll work with staff and our colleagues to develop a plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions for staff? Seeing none, is this report received? Received. Thank you very much. Our next presentation is on item 2. Oh, excuse me, Councillor Harder has arrived, and so we're just going to take 5 minutes to recognize some dedicated volunteers with the Glad Cleaning the Capital campaign. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. On behalf of the Transportation Committee and the Public Works and Environmental Services Department, we are going to proceed with some very special recognitions for our 2019 Cleaning the Capital program to recognize and honor the great work accomplished throughout the city. This year, about 70,000 participants took part in more than 1,400 projects registered with GLAD Cleaning the Capital during the spring and the fall campaigns. And for the past 26 years, our residents have continued to preserve the beauty of Ottawa's parks, our roads, our shorelines, and other public spaces for current residents, but also for future generations. Coming together to effect a positive change in the city is what being a community is all about. And depuis les débuts du programme, plus de 1,3 million de bénévoles ont participé à plus de 22 000 projets de nettoyage pour garder notre ville propre et verte. Ainsi, c'est 1 million de kilogrammes de déchets qui ont disparu de nos espaces publics et qui ont été éliminés correctement. And I would like to thank residents, our colleagues on council, as well as our generous sponsors for your continued support of the Cleaning the Capital campaign, and of course to our friends in the media who help promote it and help encourage residents to participate. And to recognize these important efforts, it's a tradition to present an award for the highest rate of volunteer participation for cleanup projects with this very prestigious certificate signed electronically by the mayor. Today is my pleasure to announce the top 2 awards for 2019. I would like to congratulate Carol Ann Meehan from Ward 22, Gloucester South Nepean. Ward 22 is being honored as the overall Ward Award winner with the highest participation ratio of 11% and a 10.2% participation ratio for the spring campaign. So Councillor Meehan, congratulations. Next, we would like to congratulate and thank Councillor Jan Harder from Barrhaven. Ward 3, yes, no, applause. Ward 3 finished with a participation ratio of 3.54%, or participation ratio, for the fall campaign. And so, Councillor Harder, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great.
Congratulations.
It's the first time,
It's your first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a little bit of a...
Well, the South End is going to compete for the award next year. Merci à vous deux et aux résidents pour notre beau travail. Nous avons très hâte de collaborer de nouveau avec vous pour les grands ménages de la capitale en 2020. Et donc, merci tout le monde. Looking forward to everyone competing very hard for this very prestigious certificate next year for 2020 to keep our parks and shorelines and roadways clear. Matt and Laura from Orleans are going to make sure that Orleans takes home at least one of those next year, right? Wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll get on with the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Just call the Camerons, right?
Excuse me. Excuse me. So now we are on to item 2. And for those of you who have missed it, there is a giant sign at the back of the room for our community safety zones. And I thought it was important to have this here today to demonstrate both what it looks like from an education perspective, but also to highlight, and this is important for our friends at the back, the challenges with implementation of this program. This is what needs to be installed at the beginning and at the back end of every community safety zone. By regulation, it has to be that wide because of the bilingual nature of our community, and that obviously poses some very serious and difficult physical challenges in terms of where to put it and how and where they can actually be installed versus not, and limits our ability to implement these, which our staff will get into. So we do have a staff presentation. Mr. Landry, Ms. Tanaka, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Blais, and we're pleased to be here to present to you our implementation plan for community safety zones. So this is required in advance of beginning our pilot for automated speed enforcement. We're still waiting for the province in terms of when we can begin that work and that pilot, but we want to get everything in place so that when they say go, we can go. And at this point, I'll pass it to Krista to go through the presentation.
Morning. The Highway Traffic Act authorizes municipalities to designate portions of their roadways as community safety zones where they deem there is a safety issue. The requirements to do this require the enactment of a corresponding bylaw as well as the installation of designated regulatory signs. As Councillor Blais mentioned, this is an example of the sign behind us over here. In 2017, the province passed a bill, Bill 65, which was the Safer School Zones Act, which allowed the use of automated speed enforcement within school zones and community safety zones. At this time, the regulations associated with the signage for school zones is not compatible with the use of automated speed enforcement. Hence, we're bringing this report forward to designate a number of roadways near schools for the purposes of piloting automated speed enforcement technology. The purpose of automated speed enforcement technology is to reduce the risk of collisions for children walking to and from schools through the reduction of operating speeds in those vicinities and the increase in compliance with the speed limit. With that in mind, we developed a data-driven approach to review the roadways around our 376 schools. Traffic Services collected data at approximately 400 locations close to schools and developed a process including a screening process, a prioritization process, and then a feasibility review of those locations. The screening process looked at all of the schools within the city to determine those with high compliance with the posted speed limit and those with a low number of children walking or cycling to school as the first step. Those that had lower compliance or more children walking were moved on to a prioritization process. In order to prioritize the locations, we looked at the number of high-end speeders, those traveling at 15 kilometers an hour or more over the posted speed limit, as well as the number of children walking to school or not being bused to school as an exposure, which is a measure of risk. We also looked at the reported collisions with children walking or cycling to school during school times at each of the locations. And we also considered those schools that were part of Safe and Active Routes to School program, which is a program that helps develop plans for school-age children to increase their active transportation as a mode to go to and from school. Once we prioritized all those locations, we then had to review each of the top 50 to determine where we can implement community safety zone signage, looked at the existing signage in terms of whether or not there was school zone signage, and then we also had to review for the technical requirements of ASC equipment. As mentioned previously, the size of the community safety zone sign is very large, and the regulations around them are very prescriptive. We looked at opportunities to change the positioning of the signs or stagger them, but the regulations are very strict. The English sign has to be placed to the left of the French sign, and they have to be aligned on both sides of the road for the beginning and ends of the community safety zone. This results in a 1.5 meter wide sign, which is difficult to place in many locations around the city. We also made sure, when we were doing our review, to make sure that the signs did not encroach on any sidewalks, roadways, or private property. If that was the case, it was ruled out as a potential site. This is an example on Meadowlands Drive around Thatcher Street of a place where we can fit community safety zone signs. On the right-hand side, you'll notice a picture of the sign in place. On the left-hand side in the red circle, that's a location where we would have to put the end sign for the opposite direction of traffic. So we would have to have enough width on both sides of the street at the beginning and ends of each of these zones in order to be able to fit the signs, which is challenging with driveway placement, et cetera, as well. This picture is an example of a location where we would not be able to accommodate the signage. This is a picture of Bank Street between Euclid and Sunnyside. On the right-hand side, you'll also see a picture of the signage, which takes up the vast majority of the sidewalk, and the corresponding place on the other side where we would have to place the ends sign for the other direction of travel. Again, not a spot where we could accommodate this sign. So once our review was done of the top 50 sites, 8 sites were selected as potential sites for automated speed enforcement and community safety zone implementation. They include Waters, Longfields, Bayshore, Meadowlands, Ogilvie, Smythe, Innis, and Katimavik. These 8 zones cover 12 different schools, a mix of both public schools or elementary schools and high schools. The next steps in the project will be to install the community safety zone signage upon council approval and enactment of the new community safety zone bylaw. We're anticipating to install the community safety zones no later than November 30th of this year. Following the release of the province's ASC regulations, or the automated speed enforcement regulations, and in addition to finalizing the necessary automated speed enforcement agreements, we will then be in a position to pilot automated speed enforcement at some of these locations. We're currently in the process of reviewing them through the circulation process to determine if there are any underground issues that would limit these sites further. We're also continuing to work with the province to make changes to the regulations to allow us to implement it to other locations that have community safety zones or school zones, and then also to look at opportunities to change the requirements around the community safety zone sign so that it is so we're able to fit it in more locations across the city. With that, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We don't have any public delegations. We do have a speakers list. Before we begin, though, there is a technical amendment that Councillor Leeper has.
Thanks, Chair. I have a technical amendment to replace document 1, draft community safety zone bylaw, whereas the report recommends approving the proposed CSZ bylaw in document 1, and whereas there were clerical and typographical errors in document 1, as the bylaw must include the posted speed limits and correct signage placement measurements, therefore be it resolved that the draft bylaw contained in document 1 of the report be replaced with the attached revised CSZ bylaw, and be it further resolved that table 1 in the report be amended to include any clerical and typographical errors corrected in the attached revised CSZ zones table described in the attached document 1 as Schedule A.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. And I also have a motion just to help shape the conversation. I'll introduce it now. Whereas the Government of Ontario passed new legislation in May 2017 that amends the Highway Traffic Act to allow municipalities to implement automated speed enforcement, ASE, in school zones and community safety zones where the speed limit is below 80 kilometers an hour. And whereas the ASE Provincial Legal Working Group has evaluated the regulations governing the requirements for school zone signage and deemed it incompatible with the evidentiary requirements for ASE, thus eliminating the use of ASE within school zones established as per provincial regulations. And whereas the only remaining option for ASE implementation is within community safety zones, and whereas the regulations require bilingual jurisdictions, such as the City of Ottawa, to install English and French community safety zone signs side by side, resulting in 1.35 meter signage that does not fit within the right-of-way in the vicinity of many schools within the city. And whereas the City of Ottawa recognizes school zones as locations warranting the same level of disincentive for speeding and other Highway Traffic Act offenses as community safety zones and construction zones, therefore be it resolved that City Council, through the Mayor, formally requests the Province of Ontario to 1, modify the Highway Traffic Act to allow for doubling of fines within school zones without the need for additional community safety zone signage. 2, modify the regulations to ensure that school zone signage meets the evidentiary requirements for use of automated speed enforcement within school zones. And 3, modify the regulations to allow for narrower signage configurations for community safety zones within bilingual jurisdictions. And so with the technical amendment and that motion, if we can discuss it all at once, Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellent motion. No comments on that. I think it hits the nail on the head. My question was to staff whether the wording on the signage is mandatory. I think the answer is yes. As part of the regulation, this is the wording that is required. My issue is it's not clear to motorists that they're entering a zone that has speed enforcement technology in use. And I don't think it's 100% clear and transparent. We have signage that says red light camera as people are approaching an intersection with red light cameras. Have we been part of the working group that we're developing the regulations? Has this come up? Because I know people are going to be upset that we're not being transparent or as transparent as we should be. And this has always been an issue. When there was some pushback back in 2016-17, people were upset that it was a tax grab. I was going to be done under cloak. And I really wanted signage to be as clear as possible. Do you have anything to add?
Through the chair, yes, we've been working on the provincial working group, and there will be agreements in place between the city and the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario that will require some additional signage where we will be placing the automated speed enforcement cameras. So it would be very similar to the red light running cameras. Okay. It'll have a picture of a camera and then say speed vitesse on it to indicate that automated speed enforcement is in place at that location.
Good, and if, Chair Blais' motion is picked up by the province, I do think there's a lot of merit in doubling the fines in school zones. You see that in construction zones, and I know in the United States it's very common to have fines doubled. Can you talk about expand on the community consultation piece? I think I heard in the mayor's budget address that there would be community consultation. We would have a greater discussion on where exactly the fine revenue is going to be directed to. Can you just discuss those items, consultation and the fine revenue?
So in terms of consultation, as Krista mentioned, for this pilot, we've identified the 8 locations. We've met with the councillors to review those so that they're aware. In terms of moving forward, once the pilot's done, and the reason we want to do the pilot is because we also want to learn in terms of what are the impacts when the camera's there. Are we going to see, if today 80% of the people are speeding, are we going to see that drop to 40% or 30% or 20%? So we want to get that data, and also in terms of the revenues, because we plan on bringing forward a report next fall that would address a program moving forward, and that would be a program that would have cameras throughout the city, and part of that work will be to work with the councillors based on our priority list to identify those locations. We're also hopeful that we can address the concerns that have been brought forward through that motion so that we don't necessarily need to use community safety zone signs. If fines are doubled in school zones, this is just an additional sign. It adds to the sign clutter that, from our perspective, really isn't required if we can get the school speed zones fines doubled. In terms of the revenue, as part of a road safety action plan that we'll be bringing forward next month, we'll be discussing that, but the intent would be any revenues that are generated through automated speed enforcement would be reinvested into road safety projects and the road safety action plan, and we'll have more details on that next month.
At this committee? At this committee? Okay. What speed above the posted speed limit will trigger a photo enforcement fine?
Through the chair, the threshold speed will be established at the steering committee level on a provincial level, and the intent is to keep it confidential. We don't want the impression that a certain level of speeding is tolerated or acceptable. So that is the intent of the program, as many other jurisdictions run their programs as well.
I agree that any speeding is unacceptable. However, this program will not be accepted by the public if we're giving tickets out for people going 2 kilometers over the speed limit. There has to be some wiggle room that people may challenge the technology, but we're really targeting people who are grossly abusing speed limits in certain zones. So can you confirm it'll be a reasonable amount above the speed limit?
Through the chair, yes, I can confirm that there will be some tolerance, and that was all taken into consideration when establishing the threshold.
My last comment, Mr. Chair, is when the announcement came out, I think on November 1st, I immediately wrote to Mr. Landry because I had a number of questions about the criteria used in the screening process to compile the list and the top 8 or 9 locations. I'm meeting with Mr. Landry, I think today or tomorrow, to go through that because I have a number of problematic areas in my ward. The one that comes to mind is Carlton Heights, which is on Prince of Wales, a former highway where children are crossing the street that didn't make the list. And I'm sure there are many other viable, worthy school zones that should have this. I recognize this is a pilot project, and I'm certainly open to seeing the success of this for these locations, but we desperately need this technology in other locations, not just in the suburbs. There are many school zones in the city and rural areas as well that need that. So, I'm very, very happy to see this project come together. I was a strong supporter of this a number of years ago, even went to Queen's Park to speak in favor. And I'm glad to see this before us, but we really need to roll this out. The speeding is the #1 issue in our residential communities, impacting the safety and security of our residents, and we need to tap into whatever tools are available to enforce those limits. So I appreciate this pilot. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that you met with me before to tell me about the one in my zone. I appreciate it. I think it's an excellent choice. Bayshore, there's a high number of active transportation participants in the students because they literally live across the street. Very little busing in that area, so there's a number of kids that are just crossing the street. So to encourage active transportation, we have to continue this. As a former trustee and a member of the Active Transportation Committee for the city, for OSTA, I know that was a big problem, is just getting kids across those main arterial streets that are very, very busy. And I appreciate hearing about the community consultation. I wanted to know, in terms of just people going by and seeing these signs, I wondered why they didn't put that symbol on of the little camera, why that wasn't done. I mean, I think that gets the message across. I understand the need for the big sign, but I think a little picture like that really gets the message across better in terms of, we're going to catch you if you speed. Why wasn't that done like the red light cameras?
Through the chair, excuse me, there is a plan to implement those types of signs with the implementation of automated speed enforcement. Community safety zones, however, can be implemented anywhere in the city. They can be standalone without automated speed enforcement, and it's only because of the Highway Traffic Act and the way in which the province has approved the use of automated speed enforcement that we must install the community safety zone signs at this time to pilot the technology. Some of the locations may or may not have automated speed enforcement, but depending on the results of the circulation for the different designs and whatnot. But the plan is to implement those signs as well when automated speed enforcement is available.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to say I appreciate the motion brought forward by Councillor Blais. I think that would be very helpful. I was very surprised to learn that, for example, DeRoy Kennedy and Woodruff Avenue couldn't get a sign because there wasn't enough space based on this sign requirement. And it just seemed bizarre that they would miss out on this technology and this help to keep kids safe based on the size of a sign. So I really, really hope that we can work that out, because there's an absolute need to keep our kids safe. My other question is, in terms of other consultations, one of the things I hear loud and clear from the community is people making illegal right turns at certain times of the day. And the big one is at Leonardster and Fairlawn, where people just ignore no right turn sign at peak hours, which is designed to keep kids safe as they walk over to DeRoy Kennedy. And it's just ignored. I know the technology is out there because I was at an AMO conference, and they do have that ability to make it so that if people make an illegal turn, they can be fined as well. Are we looking at that down the road?
Through the chair. Currently, there is no provision in the Highway Traffic Act to use that form of technology to enforce that type of infraction, but we would certainly consider it if it became an option.
So should I tell my residents to lobby the province on this? Because they're quite concerned. It's been an ongoing problem for years. A lot of safety concerns in terms, and this is with crossing guard.
There are opportunities, not just with turn restrictions, for different forms of automated enforcement, for sure. There are a couple of locations where there are bus lane infractions as well that are causing a safety concern. So I would encourage those who are interested in seeing these other forms of automated enforcement to definitely bring it up with the province, as they're the ones who will be responsible for adding that to the Highway Traffic Act.
Thank you very much, and I do hope they're listening, because it's all about the safety of our kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question in respect to the photo radar component of it. So I understand each one of these signs is $600, and that's going to be funded out of the traffic services budget. When the photo radar is implemented, how much are we anticipating each of those devices is going to cost, and which budget is that going to come out of?
Through the chair. The revenue generated from the automated speed enforcement is anticipated to pay for the operating costs of the systems. Currently, the implementation is being funded through the Safety Improvement Program and the Safer Roads Ottawa program for the implementation of the 8 sites that is part of this pilot. The report that we bring forward in the fall of next year will address the funding process for the devices going forward.
Okay. There are many, many counselors probably around this table and communities across the city that are eager to receive not only these zones, but the photo radar component of it. And I understand that you had 50 on your list that you were looking at. What I'm curious about is whether or not, if there is any issues in having this incorporated into traffic operations budget or having the revenue funneling back to it, if we can consider this as part of our TTCs.
The TTC can't incur operational pressures, so I don't think you could include it through the TTC program. But that being said, when we bring back a report next fall, we'll have all the data that will support the recommendation that we bring forward. And if we can, like I mentioned earlier, get the province to allow us not to have put these community safety zones, that we can, because every school's got the school zone signs today. So with that change, you know, the 340 some odd schools would all of a sudden become doubling fines. So that also allows police, when they're out doing their work, to double fines as well. So I think we're pushing hard. I know Krista's working very hard with the stakeholder group, which does include staff from MTO and other cities in the province, to get that in place, because from our perspective, just adding these community safety zone signs just adds to the clutter of the street, and especially near schools, you want people to be focused on the road and the kids that are crossing or walking along the sidewalks versus looking at all these signs on the road.
I also was curious as to, you mentioned you have the criteria and it's all in the report in respect to identifying locations. I know I was personally disappointed that Renault Road wasn't included because there are 2 schools there and we have issues, but we'll deal with that and we'll chat about it. But I'm wondering as to what's the next step in terms of, are you going to be going back through that list of 50? How do we make sure that we're moving forward with implementing more as we go? Like, what's the next stage with that?
Through the chair. It will really depend, I think, a lot on how the changes are made at the province. We're hoping that they align with the timing of our report. Many of the locations in the top 50 were ruled out because of a signage issue. So if that is cleared up, then we would still want to go back to the higher ones where there's a higher exposure and risk for children walking to and from school. And try and address those first and move further down the list as we bring on new sites.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm very supportive of the initiative. I just wanted to probe a little bit more on timing. In terms of the prioritization of those top 50, how many of those were warranted in the core of Ottawa without looking at whether they can actually be put there? How many of those top 50 were in the core offhand?
We don't have that information right now, but we can get that to you later today.
Okay, but certainly some of them would be there, I assume. Were there 0 options within the core to implement one of these on the pilot project, or was there actually an option but it just wasn't very high on the list? I just want to clarify, because I know there's a lot less space in the core of Ottawa, but I just want to know if there was actually no option at all to put these signs in community safety zone signs up in school areas. And I'm looking at Sunnyside. I have a map of it here on Google Maps. And it looks like there's some area there beside Hopewell, which has a huge amount of students that walk to school, for example. There's some, the sidewalk is extended, some other space here. So I'm just thinking, is there no space at all within the core to have one of these as a pilot, within the pilot project?
Through the chair, we really only reviewed the top 50 sites, so once we look at the list, we'll be able to answer that question. We did check every site in the top 50 to determine whether or not the signs would fit, whether or not there was existing school zone signage in place. Could have been ruled out for one of those 2 reasons, or some locations were ruled out because we couldn't get power to it. But we'd be happy to sit down with you and go through your list if you'd like.
Well, I would just say, if there, I mean, and maybe you'll take this as a direction, but if you do find a spot, because right now, there's none in the core, right? They're all outside of the core. That have been the 8 spots that are looking to be piloted. So if you do find a spot within the core, just one spot, it would be helpful to have that as on the pilot list, even if it's a 9th location. And so I don't know if you can take this as direction to come back, but just, I think we're just looking for one spot within the core. And if that's possible, let's make that happen. The cost doesn't seem that great, given Councillor Dudes's question. So it'd be great if we could implement that. I'd even be willing to pay for it out of my own budget. But if you can take that as direction and come back with one spot in the core, would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. We can take a look at that. One thing is, right now, we're focused on the permanent locations. The regulations also allow us to look at mobile. So we're looking potentially next spring to bring in a mobile camera. And if we can get the regulations changed, assuming that we can't find any spots, because I believe that we didn't have any spots that were in the top 50 that you could fit the signs, like the community safety zone signs. So if there's ability to allow us the changes with the school zone signage, then we would be able to utilize the mobile. Because we also want to learn from the mobile camera in terms of, if you have it in for a week or two, how does that change the driver behavior, and then when you remove it, does the driver behavior go back to what it was prior to? So, but we'll sit down with you to go through the list in your ward.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, just on that earlier piece, if there is a spot for these on both sides of the street without the mobile camera, you mentioned that next fall would be when we had fuller implementation of this after the pilot project. And so that would that not require those signs, or would it require those signs? It just depends, I guess, how the province responds.
Well, if the regulations stay like they are today, they would require the signs. If the regulations get changed and allows us to use the school zone signage, then it would open up a lot of locations. Because I know in the top 50, there were quite a few that we had to take out because either they were in a school zone where we changed the speed limit with flashing lights. That's the biggest challenge, is because it's a photo, you need a flashing light. When the picture's taken, may not be flashing, so they may say, well, the light wasn't working, so it really wasn't a school zone. So those are the kind of things we need to revise in the regulations. But if those get all changed between now and next fall, our recommendation would be different than if we can all use the community safety zone, at least in the interim. The other thing is, as part of the recommendation today, previously for any community safety zone, we need to bring a report to committee. We're also asking for delegated authority for the general manager and the director to be able to implement those, and then we report those on a yearly basis, which will make things go a lot faster. So even if we can get the province to change the signage like we have today side by side, basically one panel is about the size of a speed limit sign. So if we could have them one on top of the other, then it would give a lot more opportunities within areas where you've got limited space. So even if that part of it changed, that would allow us to look at more options.
Okay, that's great. Makes sense to me, and I'll look forward to hearing back from you on that potential 9th for pilot if we can find a spot in the core for one of these. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ulof.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. Really glad to see that Waters in front of St. Francis of Assisi is going to be included in the pilot. Very, very difficult to keep it secret. It was staked for about 3 weeks before. It was a little bit unclear in your presentation, and it was a little bit unclear when we met to discuss it, but at the locations that you've chosen, I know you've probably done locates already. Any ground issues or any conflicts underneath those sites that you've chosen?
Through the chair, we haven't received the circulations back for all of them yet. They're one of the sites, Waters, we do require to go a little bit further to get power than we had initially anticipated, which may delay the implementation. It may be later December for that site, but it still is feasible as part of the pilot. The rest of the sites we haven't really heard back on yet.
Yeah, I can appreciate how deep you'd have to go, considering the wind events that we've had in Ottawa, both in the South End, West End, and in Ottawa, or in Orleans, and with a sign that big, totally understand. Mm-hmm. So there's not going to be any issues with getting that one installed in the cold weather, like the concrete will form, everything should be fine, yeah?
Yeah, we're rushing the circulations, so we're expecting to get a few back later this week, and construction would begin hopefully next week or the week after. Our goal is to be a lot of the locations done by the end of November. But again, we still have to wait for the province to change the regulations. So we can be already set to go. But if the province waits a month or 2 or 3, then we have to wait that time. But if they tell us, you know what, December 1st is good to go, then we'll be ready to move forward with that. And we'll advise council once we know for sure a date's been provided from the province.
That's great. So we went out with the Safer Roads Ottawa and the Enviro Centre and actually walked that route along Waters. There are no addresses on it other than St. Francis of Assisi. So it's all backyards. So as you can imagine, people don't slow down whatsoever, and then they pick up quite a bit of speed going in there. So really appreciate being included in the project, and great work, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Olaf. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. So I understand that my colleagues have raised the fact that, the 5 downtown wards don't have a pilot. I appreciate the motion that the Chair has put forward to try to ensure that we're included in future lists as this becomes more widely rolled out. What are the conditions that we're looking for in order to be able to put up this sign? Like, how much right-of-way do you need, and what are your considerations around sight lines, et cetera?
Through the chair. The signage is 1.35 meters wide, so we have to be able to install it within our property, within the right-of-way property, and have a buffer on either side, so it doesn't hang over onto the road or onto the sidewalk. We wouldn't want people to hit their heads on it as they're walking past on the sidewalk, or for, a truck to take it out if it were hanging over the road in any way.
Do you have a number on that buffer? Is it a foot, or is it inches, or is it, how tightly can you fit it into there?
I'd say, like, the sign is 1.35 meters wide. I'd say you'd want about between 1.7 and 2 meters of area, because we have signs, and you see them around the city where a quarter of it gets knocked off because, either because of snow plows or because there's a truck that was a little too close that had something that was hanging. So we just want to ensure that. And the challenge in the core is that you don't have that boulevard like we saw in the one picture on Meadowlands, that there's space to do that. In the core, you've got the road, the sidewalk, and then the home. And so we can't put it on the sidewalk, we can't put it on the road, and we can't put it, so just there's no room. Versus, if it was like, if we could put them one on top of the other, then you could put it on an existing pole like we do with speed limit signs. And so I think if we can get that change done by the province, that would open up a lot of locations within the 5 wards in the core that we just can't do because there's physically no room to do so.
I hope we're successful in that. I know Councillor McKenney and I and myself went on our own dime down to Toronto at Queen's Park to make the argument for this regime. So we're hoping to benefit from it. What work remains to be done on the ASE regs? That seems to be taking a long time. Where are we? What work remains to be done to finalize those so that we can start implementing?
Through the chair, there isn't any real work left for the city to do. It's really with the province right now.
Yep.
So they've been drafted, they've been sent up for review and approval, and we're just in a holding pattern waiting to see when they're approved at this time.
So outstanding issues among the working group have been resolved, do you feel, or are there still outstanding issues that need to be settled?
In terms of the regulations, no.
Okay.
There aren't any. So it's really just with the province and their approval process at this time.
Okay. So we don't anticipate that there are further disputes around those, just somebody needs to take a look at it on their desk and get those passed?
I can't speak for the province. I'm not sure. Somebody may have a question, but it's really with them at this point.
And I would also add that, we've gone, the city, we're doing the same format as the red light cameras, where the City of Toronto's done the procurement. They've also got the processing center, and what we'll do is we'll tag along onto that contract to purchase the cameras from the vendor. Okay. So that process has all gone through. They've got a vendor, they've started, that's why we're starting to install some of the permanent locations. So everything's ready to go, but it's a matter of just waiting until the province turns on the switch to say you're good to go. So we're not waiting until the province says you're good to go before starting the work.
Yep.
We want to be at a point that, if everything's installed and they say, next week it'll be enacted, then we can start next week.
Okay. There was, I think in your presentation, just curious, you made quick note of having to check the underground infrastructure. So when you're looking at your locations, what is the relationship between what's underground and what's on top? Are we tapping into power for these, or?
Yeah, so the underground is the foundation that we have to install, and also there's duct that has to go from the hydro, the closest hydro feed, to the foundation, which will then feed the unit. So we have to, similar to the red light cameras, and even street lights and other traffic signals, we have all this underground plant that requires power. So we just have to find that connection from where the hydro can supply us the power. So that's the underground work that needs to get done.
Is there the potential to use solar?
Through the chair, the requirements through the procurement process was that it would be hardwired and powered.
Okay. All right, Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Leeper. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, on the technical amendment from Councilor Leeper, is this carried? Carried. On the main motion, is this carried? Carried. And on my motion, writing to the province, is this carried? Carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are now moving on to item 3, our service delivery review of winter operations. And I think we all thought and were hoping that we would have this presentation before there was 15 to 20 centimeters of snow on the ground. But such is life in Canada. Record snowfall. Yeah.
Record cold.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's cold. Minus 25.
Tuesday, November 11th.
Ms. Gibbons, thank you very much. Off to you.
Good morning, Chair, members of committee. I would like to thank you for having us here today to present to you the improvements that we have put in place for our winter operations as part of the service delivery review. My name is Lila Gibbons, and I'm the Director of Roads and Parking Services. And joining me here today is Quentin Levesque, who is the Director of Technical Innovation and Engineering Services. Quentin has been and will continue to be a key member of our team through the service delivery process. To start off with, we felt very strongly that our supervisors and our staff, those individuals that are on the roads every day, had to be a key partner in helping us develop the solutions that would have real impacts on our winter operations this year. The changes and improvements that you will see throughout the presentation were developed through the ongoing consultation with our staff as they remained heavily involved throughout the whole process. We reviewed previous winter operations and focused this review on opportunities for improvements based on concerns we heard from Council and from our residents. We are also working closely with the union to ensure open communication and transparency through the entire process.
Council's direction, as well as the feedback we heard from individual councillors and their residents, guided our strategy for this service delivery review. Staff have leveraged this opportunity to make real changes and improvements going into this winter. We focused on putting in place a consistent structure across each one of our yards, creating deployment plans and processes based on geography, infrastructure, and community types, and looking at areas where we heard improvements need to be made and where we are seeing operational pressures and challenges for our staff. The service delivery review is all about looking at ways to continually improve our winter operations and become more consistent in how we deploy and deliver our services citywide. Some of the larger changes and adjustments we have made ahead of this winter are new area and geographic boundaries, position restructuring and realignment within each of our yards, and formalized deployment strategies, plans, and processes within each of these new areas.
So area boundaries. Given the similarities and through our discussions and research, we realize that there's an opportunity to become more consistent based on geography, types of infrastructure being maintained, community type, and operational challenges. This structure offers us the opportunity to be more strategic in our service appreciating the differences in infrastructure and conditions in our urban, suburban, and rural areas. We can now develop specific strategies for how we service these community types and differing conditions. For example, if we're experiencing high wind conditions causing blowing snow and icy roads in the rural areas, but not the same conditions in the urban area, the rural yards can now deploy resources earlier to those affected zones. Whereas in the past, to drive consistency across the city, we used a one-size-fits-all approach where staff and equipment in all areas were deployed at the same time. We also quickly understood that communities have changed over time, with rural areas who now have large suburban neighborhoods within them and suburban areas that have urban components. So over the next year, we will work towards better aligning those areas within our new boundaries, as well as reviewing where future growth is being planned to determine how to best adjust our operations.
Through this review process, inconsistencies and gaps were identified where resources were aligned from yard to yard in areas of echelon plowing, residential plowing, and sidewalk maintenance. Through our discussions with frontline supervisory staff on what activities we should prioritize and put more focus on, there is alignment with what we heard from council and residents last winter in that sidewalk maintenance should be the priority and needs to be resourced 24/7. We have moved forward with restructuring and redeploying staff to create greater capacity for winter maintenance of sidewalks, taking advantage of the efficiency of nighttime operations by allocating additional staff to overnight sidewalk maintenance. This balancing of resources allows for 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week maintenance of sidewalks in accordance with our current maintenance quality standards. As this has proven to be a valuable review, we will continue with this practice going forward, ensuring our priorities are aligned with those of council and the residents we serve, and that we are regularly reviewing our routes and where our resources are aligned to determine where growth is best applied.
So deployment process. To ensure the right response for the right weather event, we are developing formal deployment plans to serve as guidelines for staff in executing their work. Leveraging the knowledge of our frontline staff, supervisory staff, who have hundreds of collective years of experience amongst them, we've begun documenting detailed plans for how and when to deploy resources and equipment within various winter event scenarios. Some of these scenarios obviously are our major and our minor winter events, freezing rain events, and our freeze-thaw cycles. These formal plans will serve as a guideline for frontline supervisors citywide in determining the resources and equipment to be deployed based on various weather-related factors such as forecasted accumulation or precipitation, event duration, our maintenance quality standard trigger points, and ambient and surface temperatures. As a result, this initiative ensures that residents living in similar community types, like urban to urban, suburban to suburban, and rural to rural, no matter where they live within the city, can expect consistent service. These deployment plans will also be leveraged to provide members of council with advanced communication information to assist in communicating with their residents to ensure they are aware of what to expect in their community during a specific type of event. These plans will also be used during our post-event debriefs, which is going to drive continuous improvement through our winter operations.
There are also a number of additional winter improvements that we are putting in place for this winter season. They include GPS on our sidewalk equipment, allowing for better oversight and monitoring of routes. Grit, sand, and salt will be available to all yards, allowing for the usage of different materials where warranted based on weather conditions. To ensure consistency across the city by community type, for the upcoming winter season, area managers will be primarily responsible for councillor engagement. This adjustment will allow for consistent messaging, quicker response times, and the ability to identify trends. As part of our catch basin deployment plan, staff has also identified heat maps and trouble spots that have required consistent maintenance to remove blockages that create pooling and the possibility of ice buildup. Lastly, Roads and Parking Services is working towards putting in place standards for developers to ensure certain conditions are met prior to the handover of new infrastructure during the winter season.
So as part of our ongoing efforts to use the right materials for the right winter event, Road Services will continue to pilot the icebreaker units, which have shown favorable results when dealing with icy sidewalk conditions. For this upcoming season, staff are procuring 6 additional attachments to increase our ability to leverage the equipment where needed. Additionally, road services staff are procuring new blades to be used on some of our sidewalk machines. These blades have a hatch pattern front welded onto a carbide blade, which should be more effective on ice and hard-packed snow conditions throughout our sidewalk network. Similarly, over the past 2 years, the asphalt repair program has been complemented by the continued use of the Python 5000 Patrol Repairer. Road Service is actively exploring the feasibility of supplementing the asphalt repair program with more of these units.
Last winter was incredibly challenging, and status quo was not an option for us. We recognized that there was an expectation from council and residents that we make real changes and improvements ahead of this winter season. Roads and Parking Services is striving to improve and be more consistent in how we deploy and deliver our services. The consistent alignment of resources across each of our winter maintenance yards, increased consistency in how we plan and deploy, winter maintain similar infrastructure, and approach operational and maintenance challenges will ensure residents in similar community types, no matter where they live in the city, can expect consistent service. We have been listening to residents over the past few winters and know that there are specific areas where we can have room to improve, particularly improving walkability throughout the city. We also realize our work doesn't stop here. Continually improving our operations is a priority for us, and know that there will be more work to do after this winter.
So the next step is to begin our review of the winter maintenance quality standards. These are the standards that were previously approved by council and actually exceed the provincial standards as they sit right now. It also exceeds the standards with most other municipalities around us. These standards group roads, sidewalks, and pathways into classes where they have similar characteristics and functions. These classes are then used to prioritize winter maintenance, including the frequency of snow plowing, ice control, and snow removal. As per the direction from council, Roads and Parking Services will bring back a report to committee and council in 2021 outlining options. At that time, council and residents will be able to determine the level of service that they would like to see, along with the corresponding budget impacts or pressures that would be required. In the interim, through the service delivery review, we will be incorporating improvements to the winter maintenance operations starting this season. It will be through the maintenance quality standard review where staff will consider and or recommend changes to these current standards. So finally, here's an example of some of the communication efforts that we're doing. It's a postcard that was put together that's available to council and our residents. It gives some fun facts on winter operations. So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to us today, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Leila and Quinton. We do have one public delegation, Mr. Woodhouse. It's good to see you again. It's been a long time. Off you go.
Well, as I exited my house yesterday, I was confronted with the obvious defects in the snow clearance in the city. Basically, every curb cut was snowed in. It was impossible. So I took the only available route that was open and cleared, and that was the road. And I don't recommend that. You have to have nerve to face down some of those motorists coming at you. And it's not nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Woodhouse. I believe Councillor Leeper has a question.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, you said you were confronted with the obvious, every blank was snowed in. Would you say curb cut or sidewalk?
Curb cut.
Curb cut.
Every curb cut. And and even most of the driveways, which I do use, I couldn't get on. And as I was whipping up the road, I noticed that even if I could get on the sidewalk, I couldn't get off of it because there's no exit. There's no entrance and there's no exit for the sidewalks. How do you want me to use them?
Perfect, thank you, I appreciate the clarification. How do you, to staff, how do you want him to use the clear sidewalks if you can't access them from the curb cuts? And it is obviously a perennial problem where our sidewalks have been cleared, but corners are still impassable, and it sometimes takes days.
Yes, through the chair. In addition to having the 24/7 sidewalk coverage, we do have in place heat maps that prioritize and pay special attention to those areas where we have school zones, older adult communities, and the vulnerable sector. So we can work with counselors and the residents within those wards to identify those areas that require prioritization and special attention.
Thank you very much, Councilor Wilbur. Thank you, Mr. Woodhouse. Could you just maybe hit the button? Thank you. We have no other public delegations. I do have a speakers list. Councilor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the extra effort that's going in and the prioritization of sidewalks for walkability, accessibility. One of the big things that we have to look at is in terms of getting to public transit. And that's probably the one thing I hear the most. If we want people to walk to those stations and those bus stops, they have to be prioritized. I had a tweet sent to me yesterday morning about Lincoln Field Station, and I want to give direction to the public on who to send this to, because it's, you know, at very early hours of the morning, and they can't get to the station. And I believe that we're going to work on these things, but what should the public do to draw attention to something that has been missed on something that's a major access point?
Through the chair, so thank you for the question. We are obviously pulling some more resources towards our sidewalk operations, both during the daytime and during the evening hours. We are working closely with our colleagues in transit to ensure that the pathways and sidewalks leading to their stations are clear, understanding that timing is really, really critical. The storm that we received starting November 11th and into November 12th really didn't subside till the early morning hours, around 5 o'clock in the morning, where at that time we did have our sidewalk machines out. For the most part on our priority runs, doing a second run. So timing is very critical in terms of when the storm hits, and we do have extra focus on our sidewalks. So we did have our machines out very shortly after.
Thank you. But in terms of how the public can draw attention, are we going to set it up so that we can get some quick reaction? Because in terms of people getting to their bus stops early in the morning, what can they do? Should they be calling 311 right away? Is there any special service in terms of quick action?
311 is definitely an option because it does go to our supervisors, the ones that are in charge of those particular areas, understanding that we do still follow our maintenance quality standards, and through the service delivery review, we're looking at making improvements that still fall within those standards. And some of those priority routes, if it is on a priority route, it's 4 hours after the last snowfall, and on other routes that are designated to classification 2B or more, it is 12 to 16 hours. So the real opportunity moving forward is through our maintenance quality review standards, our standard review, and that's where there'll be an opportunity to change those standards in order to better incorporate. But definitely in the interim, if there is a concern near some of these transit areas, please do call 311.
Thank you. As you know, I put in for those standards to be looked at. I really appreciate Mr. Woodhouse being here. One of the things that is drawn to my attention all the time is the quality of the clearing in terms of wheelchair accessibility. It's particularly dangerous for them, and this happens all the time. And do you have a standard that you use so that wheelchairs are taken into consideration? I certainly have people in my ward who have that issue, and in some cases, like Mr. Woodhouse, they're in situations where they can fall. For example, in terms of just the last couple of days, and I know this has been a big surprise, so this has been a tough one, but I went out this morning, went out for my run, and the sidewalks are cleared, but ice is there because it melted a little bit, and then there's icy patches. And I really appreciate having those icebreakers for sidewalks because they're going to be needed over and over again. But do we look at that in terms of wheelchair quality clearing?
Through the chair. So currently what we do have in place is we do have those heat maps that do identify those areas that require priority or special attention for a vulnerable sector. And we can work with councillors and their residents to identify those priorities. Further review and more analysis will be put in place when we do the maintenance quality standards review for what you just mentioned, councillor, around wheelchair accessibility.
Thank you. My last question is on the old "Where's my plow?" I'm getting asked, where's my plow? Of being able to find out when your street is going to be cleared and that it's going to be coming within a few hours or whatever. What do we have to let people know that the plow is coming and or it's in their neighborhood? Do we have that? Can we put that "Where's my plow" service back?
That current program is still being used in-house to help us better monitor our plow beats and our routes. We are working closely with our colleagues in innovation to develop an app or a program that's more user-friendly for our residents.
Well, that's good to hear. What time frame are we looking at? Will we see that this winter?
I don't have a time frame for that yet. We're in discussions with them. They're looking to see if there are some off-the-shelf programs that would be sufficient. As soon as we have more information, we will get back to you.
Oh, thank you. Is that been put into the budget to put in financing to pay for that app to make it available this year?
We don't have an app that's in place right now, so we don't have an approximate cost to put in the budget. We will work through our innovation team to see if there is something that we can put into place sooner rather than later. Again, I will come back and let you know if we do have a potential option.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Councillor Kavanagh asked some of my questions, but just on the sidewalk piece of it, really happy to have you two as a team. I'm really thank you for the meetings and looking forward to working with both of you. So I know we're going to see some good change as a result of your leadership. On the sidewalk piece, I was happy to see some of the changes happening there, but give me a practical, real-world example. So I think yesterday maybe we're just getting started, right? But I walked home from City Hall last night after meetings, and takes me about 40 minutes. But as I was walking, a lot of the roads were plowed, but the sidewalks were not in the Old Ottawa South area. And so, from a practical standpoint, will we be seeing those sidewalks plowed relatively at the same time as our roads in the morning? I recognize the snowfall kind of finished up around 5 a.m. We had some roads plowed, but then the sidewalks weren't until 9 o'clock that evening, about that time in my area, for example. So how will it practically work to have sort of that 24-hour on the sidewalk piece versus the road in my area?
So currently, as I mentioned, we are still working through the maintenance quality standards that were approved by council. What you're suggesting potentially to have them run in line with the roads in all classifications is an increase in services. But what we're doing with the 24/7 coverage is now we have the ability to ensure that we have coverage through the overnight hours. Unfortunately, with this storm, the event ended early in the morning. If it would have ended 10, 11 o'clock at night, you would have seen those roads or those sidewalks cleared by the morning commute. But if there is an increase in service levels that we're looking to, that's definitely going to be considered through the maintenance quality standard review.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Luloff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you guys so much for your proactive communication throughout this entire process. You guys have been wonderful. I know that last year was really challenging. In the East End, Brian, Bruce, and Matt did a really, really wonderful job. They were always there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to help us out with problem areas. I know that that's not sustainable, having, a councillor stand on a street corner and say, come and clear this street. So I'm glad that we've come up with an overall plan. I think that what you've brought to us is thoughtful, and I think that it's going to make a big difference this year. So thank you guys both so much for this work. So in my meeting with you, Ms. Gibbons, you mentioned that you would look at ways to improve the winter parking ban enforcement, and you mentioned that today as well. Do you mind elaborating a little bit, or is that a little bit out of your, will we have to talk to Roger about that? Do you have any further details of what that might look like? Are we talking about a bylaw officer, following a plow, or a bylaw officer in a plow, or the plow calling the bylaw officer and letting them know? Do we have an idea of what that looks like?
We are working very closely with our colleagues in bylaw in trying to better enforce the overnight parking bans. What that does, it helps the city ensure that our roadways are cleared more efficiently and on time. So they have committed to helping us by bringing on additional bylaw officers in order to help support ticketing these individuals. But what we're going to do at the front end is we're going to do more education, let residents know why it's important to ensure that they aren't parked on the streets during these overnight bans, and how it's going to help them and their residents.
I think that's great, and the communication that's coming out of your department has been fantastic. Maybe like a video of what the plow driver has to go through. I mean, last year I did a ride-along with one of them for his whole beat, and my goodness, the frustrations that they go through. Some people were throwing snowballs at them, like unbelievable. These guys are out there and gals are out there, 24/7, working hard for our city, and so I guess getting that message out would really be helpful. That doesn't happen in CARP, no? Are there any new infographics for members of the public being developed and considered that would outline these changes to service delivery, that would show the suburban, rural, and urban strategies and strategies for the weather events?
So we are currently working on communication strategy to bring out to the residents and to councillors. That will be coming forward very shortly. In terms of the strategies themselves, that's something that we will be working on throughout the winter months. That's with our pre-event meetings and our post-event meetings to develop what better ways to manage infrastructure within these different community types. So as we move through the year, yes, we will continue to bring out additional information, but in terms of the strategies for each of those areas, that's in the development phase.
Awesome. Yeah, they're super helpful. I mean, the one that you guys developed last year and put out, Winter by the Numbers, very helpful. A lot of positive feedback from people. People didn't realize that, you're clearing the equivalent of from Halifax to Vancouver, and I think back again, which is, an outrageous amount of road to be working with. So I know that it feels insurmountable at times, but I think the strategy will really help. Can councillors be invited to some of those post-event lessons learned sessions just to learn? I mean, I don't want to interject or tell anybody how to do their job. I don't think that that's appropriate, but it would be interesting to kind of see what those look like.
Through the chair, we can definitely take that into consideration and get back to you.
Wonderful. We've got a great relationship with Trim and Cedarville Yard. Those guys are incredibly competent, so it'd be nice to see kind of this strategy unfold a little bit. And how are the heat maps going to be developed? Are they going to be from publicly made service request locations and service requests from last year that came in? Or is that going to be something data that's going to be collected over the course of this winter?
Through the chair, so the heat maps we do have in place today are as a result of requests, whether it be through 311 or working with councillor's office and their residents. We'll continue to build those over this winter as well as we receive information on where we need to prioritize and pay special attention to.
Yeah, we certainly did our best to deal with some of the iron issues and some of the some of the not concrete, but asphalt dips over the course of the summertime. The roads crew, same crew that do our snow clearing, were incredibly proactive with us. We work to kind of even out some of those dips and some of those irons that sit a little bit high. So you definitely have good data from Ward 1 from us driving around and putting in the SRs. So thank you very much for your work, and we look forward to the best winter that we can have anyway. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Excuse me, Councillor DeRuse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to you. Maybe Councillor Lulaf want to take a shift one night and go ahead and drive all these equipment. That will be great, and that will be helpful. I'm sure the people at the staff at the yard will love that. So anyway, thank you very much for the report and the review. I've been a long time waiting for it. I just have to say a few things. I want to thank you for meeting with us ahead and then giving us some stat and giving us some information ahead of the transportation meeting. But I still have some personal concern, and I'm really happy. One thing I'm very happy to see that finally we get it. One size doesn't fit all. And we've been talking about the amount of participation. Sometimes in Orleans you get 8 centimeter, and sometimes in Canada you'll have 3 centimeter. I'm very happy to see that it's been implemented in our, implemented and went down to our supervisor to be able to make the call and make a decision based on area by area. But if I look at the map, I really still have a concern about one supervisor that looking after all rural road. And I know that if you look at Cumberland and Carp and Osgood and Rideau, it's a massive area, and I'm not sure how this is going to be impacting not the level of service, because we know that the frontline worker, they'll be still out and everything, but the amount of the service that counselor's office, we're going to be able to have the attention of that only one individual that's servicing that 4 rural areas. So I do have some concern about that. I would like to see if and also I know that some of that supervisor also still have some urban, suburb area also he's looking after. In my case, for instance, so the supervisor is looking after rural area, but also looking after Riverside South and some areas in Findlay Creek. And I don't think this is fair to have one person serving the whole rural area. I don't know how you're going to manage it. I hope you can elaborate a little bit on how this is going to fold out.
Through the chair. So thank you for your question, Councillor. Just to clarify, for the rural area, there will be one area manager that's responsible for overseeing that area. However, we'll have 7 zone supervisors. So we have 7 zones within that rural area, and each of those zones will have a supervisor that oversee their yard. So we haven't made any changes at the zone level going into this season. There hasn't been any changes to resources or equipment either. So nothing has changed in that respect from a kind of a service perspective going forward. As you had mentioned, we will work with our supervisor staff as well as counselors as well when we look at, okay, how do we go about separating those suburban areas that need to move from the rural into the new suburban zones or areas, sorry.
So the area manager, he's the one who will make the call when those equipment will be deployed. Am I correct on that? Or each supervisor, zone supervisor will be making those calls? I'd like to know.
Through the chair, so it'll be up to each zone supervisor who'll be empowered to make that decision on when to deploy based on the weather conditions.
Thank you. My next question will be like, when you did this review, and I saw that it was, we did a quick review in the last 7 months you've been working on. Are we going to have a beat review? Is it anything on the plan to review the beats actually in each ward?
Through the chair, so yes, over this next year and prior to next winter season, we'll be doing that analysis on each of the beats.
I also want to give you a compliment about the communication ahead of the storm. I want to second what Councillor Lulaf was saying, that they're very helpful and they help our staff relaying things to the community. And throughout our internal messaging, through our newsletters and our social media, it's very good information for us to know so we can help you, so minimize also the call. So that's one really positive thing I want to give you, and thank you for that. Well, I'm not sure if I really, Mr. Chair, I have an issue in beats in my ward, and I want to take it offline, I don't want to keep it, but do I need an inquiry to put an inquiry about looking about my beats in my ward and get back to me about each beats and come back to me? I need to know how they've been serviced by, and I need to know if they're city staff or contracted.
Well, thank you, Councillor. You can, if you want to write up the inquiry, we can do it at the end of the meeting, or you can bring it at council. That would be fine, either one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be putting inquiry then.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Conseiller Fleury.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I won't rehash the conversations, but I want to look at three components. In your presentation, you have the MQS component, which talks about the analysis and then the reporting back in 2021. Can we expect that within this mandate of council, the MQS will be implemented and budgeted for? So I guess that's what I feel concerned, is that it feels like it slips into the next term when I understand there's a lot of work to do around the MQS, but want to make sure that winter, I guess, 21 to spring 2022, we would have it in place.
So through the chair, funding for the Maintenance Quality Standard Review is included in the 2020 budget, so we will be starting the review into next year. In 2021, prior to the budget process, we will be coming back to council with either options or recommendations, and it will be up to council and the residents to decide on the services that they would like, along with the corresponding budget impacts or pressures, and that'll be what's put into the 2021 budget process.
Okay. I want to know, so on community and protective services, we have a bylaw review process that's underway, one of which is our private contractor on private property snowplows. And I want to know from you, what is your involvement in that process? Because when I speak to the team, they tell me, we go and do the sidewalk, we go and do the street, and then boom, private contractor goes and plows a private roadway, and then it's like, if we didn't pass, we get calls back. So how are we, I understand you work with bylaw, but what is your involvement in the bylaw review? Because I have an easy fix, dash cam for all private contractors. In my mind, committee's gone a really interesting way. We're having a debate on Friday relating to short-term rentals, because we're taking on the pressure now of those short-term rentals. A lot of calls to bylaw. Every time bylaw goes out, it's $300. So why do we keep absorbing private pressures in the public environment, and it impacts our service levels? So I just want to know how you're involved in that review process for private snow contractors.
We have been in communications with their counterparts in bylaw, and we will be a part of that bylaw review. I do like your suggestion, and I know we've spoken about it before, whether dash cams can be incorporated into that. That's something that'll have to be discussed, obviously, through the bylaw review, but we do intend on having those open communications, because they're very well aware of the same concerns that you are in terms of private contractors disposing their snow on the city's right-of-way.
Okay. And then my final bucket is around staffing. So there's a lot of things that we need to work through in terms of policy and the fundamentals through MQS. I get that. And sure, we can always put more budget, and I think you're seeing through this the proposal that we'll be looking at next committee, that there's a bit more money. But I'm concerned that we have equipment, we have beats, and yet we struggle with staffing the resource, because we're already at our first snowstorm and not all the equipment is out. And that's my challenge. And in that environment, I also feel that because an operator out of the sidewalk plows, if you do road plows, you get more money per hour. So it feels like a promotion to not do sidewalk plows. So how do we create an environment where as soon as there's a gap in staffing, it goes to sidewalk issues? like the sidewalk issues are felt directly. What in your plan can you do in terms of staffing so that we don't create an environment where it's a promotion to be on a road plow versus a sidewalk plow, and as soon as we backfill, it impacts the sidewalk beats?
Through the chair, through our service delivery review process, we did align resources and equipment to each one of our beats that we have on our road network and sidewalk network. In cases where we do need to move staff around and up to larger pieces of equipment, we do leverage our casual labor pool to come in and operate sidewalk equipment so that we don't have that gap as far as not having a resource or the availability of equipment on a specific route or beat.
Maybe just the other piece to this that I find concerning is we always say we're one city, one team. I hear it through the management structure. We've been all ingrained with that goal. But then I feel pockets. I don't want to hear that, you know, in George's area, we're not, I want the entire team that if we're done in my area, go and support George. And I feel that we work in pockets, and then it's like you're only as strong as your weakest link. And it feels like these teams are competitive amongst each other, yet they should share the allocation. Yes, they have the base work, and yes, we have to make sure that the work is done in the area. But if a team is way lagging behind, we need to reallocate those resources to support the one city vision.
Through the chair, thank you for that. It's actually a culture change that I'm trying to instill within our work groups, not only within roads and parking services, but we've also recently pulled in our parks team to talk about particularly this past winter event. So there is an intent moving forward that we share that culture amongst our team, that if there is resources required elsewhere in the city, it's a simple pick up the phone and ask. And that drives down to empowering our supervisors in making the right decisions for the conditions that they are seeing. We're hoping that that goes across the board, and we're instilling that culture where if they need assistance, pick up the phone and ask.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Excuse me, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thanks to staff for the presentation and the briefing last week. 2 questions. How do you monitor service standards? So we know that after a storm, depending on the classification of the street, it should be plowed within X number of hours. How do you monitor service throughout a season so that there isn't an area that is, for whatever reason, receiving, I guess, inferior service to others? We all get complaints and issues from residents that their street seems to be the last one in the city to be plowed. That's sort of a common concern. But seriously, though, how do you, the management, assess service standards?
Through the chair, so we do have GPS on our road network equipment, and this winter season we will have GPS on our sidewalk equipment so that we can do just that, measure our performance in comparison to our standards.
So you do have a measurement tool in place?
Through the chair, yes, we do, Councillor.
Okay, and can you clarify when an overnight parking ban gets initiated? I was surprised that we did not have one earlier this week. Some of my chronic collectors had cars parked on them, and the street is a mess. It's an absolute mess because cars were parked, the plow went by, the parked cars have since moved on, and the street needs additional service. And we talked about greater enforcement this year. So why was the overnight parking ban not triggered this week, and why would it not be triggered any night where we're going to have significant enough snowfall that will require plowing?
Through the chair, so particularly with this past event, the initial expectations were in the amount of 5 to 10 centimeters. So we definitely look at the weather pattern and where it's tracking when making determinations as such. Typically, when we get into more severe weather events, this did end up being record snowfall. We will consider it 20, 25 centimeters and beyond to ensure that we have the ability to clear the roads. We are going to be putting some processes in place based on our new boundaries as well, on how better to call the overnight parking bans. And that's something we're going to work closely with our supervisors, who are the ones that are out there living and breathing that work. So they'll help us make that determination. But again, with this past storm, the storm was tracking more south of us. It did take a turn by around 1 o'clock in the morning, which I think changed the situation, and we did see record snowfalls.
Yeah, I think we talked about the need for, I think, greater consistency about when an overnight parking ban is called, and we need to really agree on the parameters now so that we don't mid-year change them, and people who maybe were parking on the street are now in a situation where they're getting tickets. All that to say, we need to not plow streets multiple times. And again, you're aware of that, and I just think that if we're even in that ballpark of getting the minimum amount that's needed to plow, you should consider calling that ban. I know it inconvenienced some people, particularly in some parts of town, but we have messy streets, and once they're messy, it's very hard to get back on track. And I'll just note this frequent use of the word record. It was the most snow for that particular calendar day, but by no means was it a record snowfall for the city of Ottawa. For that day in history, that probably exceeded the amount of snow, but let's not overuse the word record all the time. Thank you.
I think it's a record number of times to say record in one sentence. Councillor Hoopley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation and for the pre-meetings. It's very helpful, and I wish you luck this season, Lila, and I'll do what I can to help you. A couple of questions. I'm wondering about the overnight ban, and is it long enough, especially in the burbs? Because by the time you deploy your vehicles out there, what I saw a lot of last year was snowplows coming into the area at 8 a.m. and the ban's already over, so people have moved their cars back out on the street, and yet we inconvenienced them all night that they had to find alternate parking when we didn't do anything, so it's frustrating for them. So that's one question for you. Is there any possibility of extending it to both sides of it? If you want to address that, and then I'll ask you about another piece.
So through the chair, we are actually looking at different strategies, because we did hear the concerns both from councillors and residents last year that during some of the overnight parking bans, roads weren't cleared. So we are looking at different strategies on how to manage that. Do we extend time? Do we actually put zones in place so that we know that certain areas of the city will be maintained during those hours? So those are pieces that we're working on now, both with our staff and our counterparts in bylaw, to make sure that we are plowing the roads when we do call for those overnight parking bans.
Okay, so then the next piece of that is the signs, which I really like. I think they're having a positive impact, where we put them up December 1st to March 31st, I think it is, to create a temporary no parking situation so that you can come in and clear, especially the collector roads. My concern is, just as we just experienced this week, December 1st may be too late. So I'm wondering if we want to move that date ahead. Even if it doesn't snow, at least it gets people thinking about alternate arrangements. But what I saw yesterday morning, for example, was a number of cars sitting out on what's a pretty big collector piece in my community. It's one of the exits out of a community. And there was cars left there overnight, and they were still there like at mid-morning. So the plows were going around them, and we were already starting to build up those snowbanks that take away basically the whole lane of traffic once those cars are moved. Is there any chance we could move that date ahead?
So through the chair, thank you. That is one of the best practices that we have been using over the past few years in terms of limiting where people can park during the winter months. We definitely have seen some change in the weather conditions and timing, particularly of our first snowfall. So we are considering shifting operations in their entirety back by a week or two, so looking more at November 1st as trigger points versus December 1st. So we are looking at that through this season and into next season for sure.
Great. Now, another piece that some of my colleagues touched on was the bylaw deployment. In particular, they talked about the overnight ban. I know there was one example last year where we worked with bylaw to get them to come out during an overnight ban because they hadn't really done that in a while, I think, and there was over 100 tickets issued in the one night. We had multiple cars that were towed away because they've been sitting there for weeks and in some cases months, where nobody on the street even knew who owned those cars. So I'm hoping this year that you're working with bylaw to proactively get them out there and use the tools they have today to start clearing those streets ahead of time. So when you get the first big storm, those abandoned vehicles are gone, and so we can start preparing the roads ahead of time. Is there any possibility that bylaw will up their resources to support what your drivers are reporting and residents?
Through the chair, those are very valid points, and we will definitely add those to our conversation to see if there's more proactive work that can happen in terms of abandoned cars or cars that have been sitting in locations for an extended period of time.
So you're going to give Roger a heads up that I'll be on his case if they're not out there doing that. The other part I want to ask about is ice ruts. One of the things we saw, and I'm sure this was probably around the city in suburban areas or residential areas, where because we had the standard of snowpack on the residential streets, we had the experience last year of that snowpack building up and getting very, very hard. And then when we started to get some warm days, big potholes were created in the ice, where I had some streets in my neighborhood that I went over to look at, and there was mufflers in the snowbanks because it had pulled it right off the car. The hole was that deep. I know staff came in after the fact and tried to deal with it with graders and different tools like that. I'm hoping this year we're going to be a lot more proactive about that, so that if we get the chance to widen these, I guess, Class 5 streets or suburban streets, you know, in between snowfalls, if we get a chance to get out there and widen that street back out, it would help a lot. Because we can't move them down to one lane. It just creates too much problems and forces, if there's a rut, it forces every car into that rut.
Through the chair, so thank you for your question, Councillor. Part of the deployment plans and strategies we're putting in place is we are empowering supervisors within their local areas to make decisions on deployment plans and the timing of when they deploy, which we would believe will help with that very incident and issue that we had last winter season with the rutting on the residential streets.
So to make sure I understand you correctly, it'll be up to the supervisor to decide to deploy resources in between storms to clear the streets. Is that correct? Class 5?
Through the chair, so they still will be following the maintenance quality standards as a guideline. However, if the conditions warrant it and they do need to deploy staff to deal with issues such as a upcoming freeze-thaw cycle, that they'll have the ability to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. I don't have any other speakers on the list. Okay, great. That the Transportation Committee and Council receive the report for information? Received? Wonderful, thank you. The next is item 4, all-way stop control at the intersection of Crystal Ridge Place and Apple Hill Drive. Carried. Is this carried? Carried, thank you. Okay, so give me 1 second as I have to reorder the items that we added at the beginning. So we have an IPD, Bronson Avenue and Raven Road Transit Priority Improvements Environmental Assessment Study. Councillor Menard has 2 very quick questions.
Very quickly on this, Chair.
Just 1 second, Councillor.
Okay.
Is someone from Bronson at, here we go. This item? Okay, we have to move to add this to the agenda for 2 quick questions. Do we have committee's consent? Carried, thank you. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for being here, sitting through the meeting. I know we've talked a little bit about this, but I just want to make sure we get on the record. This project is to build a road within Carleton University to connect the buses for when Stage 2, the O-Train shutdown, is happening, and so it'll help prioritize access for OC Transpo and getting students and other folks in and out of campus much more efficiently, which I'm supportive of. The issue that I want to make sure we raise with Carleton and through the environmental assessment and other property agreements is that afterwards we continue to use it for transit priority, that there be something written in with Carleton that this is specific to transit priority. And I say that because there's actually a road being built just north of this specifically for other car and vehicular access, whereas this one, and we say it in the report, Carleton University has been actively involved and in full support of the project. The endeavor means transit service for students and staff will be faster and more reliable with less intrusion of buses on the internal campus roads. I completely agree with that assessment. I just want to make sure that's maintained afterwards and that we write it in. We're paying for this road on Carleton's campus and then delivering it to them afterwards, but I just want to make sure that that's part of it. So if you could just help me with this and let me know what we're doing to make sure that afterwards it stays a transit priority road.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. And yes, we had this discussion earlier. I understand the agreement does not address what happens after Phase 2 is in service. It is a private road, so Carleton University will have to go through a process if they would like to use that road in a different way. It is planned to be a transit access after the Phase 2 is in service because it provides efficiencies for transit access in the university.
I appreciate that. Is there nothing we can write in within the project agreement or within the environmental assessment that says afterwards the municipality intends that this be a transit priority road, that we don't foresee changes? We don't want to see changes in the future to change it from that.
Through the chair, I will have to take that question with me and work with our real estate folks that are working with the agreement with Carleton University.
If you could please take it as direction that that's the wish of the local councillor, and I know students also are hoping for that as well, given the problems with transit priority now on the site and what they've experienced with the start of this school year. I know that they're looking forward to having that remain a transit priority road on campus. So I appreciate you.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this item received? Received, thank you. Now we are going to communications, TRC 0319 on road resurfacing. Councillor Fleury has some questions, although I'm not sure if there's any.
Mr. Wiley, I believe, or?
Yeah.
So my question is, following Councillor Hubley's inquiry and the response provided by staff, and it's very specific to on roads. I don't care how new or old they are, but staff in the response have provided very clear, they say, when there is a road that is 4 years or less, we will tar the cracks. I'm wondering, why did we provide a timeline to that? And I used to see a lot of tars on cracks on streets across the city. I don't see it as much anymore, and I wonder if we've changed the period as per the response to inquiry. I'm just looking for clarification to that, because I do think that it plays a role in preventing potholes and in keeping the investments on our roads.
Chair, after a road is resurfaced or built, you'll typically, well, you may or may not get fracture cracking that's due to vehicle loading. It typically will show up in the first few years, up to 4 years. Crack sealing's used on those very hairline fine cracks to make sure that the moisture stays out of those cracks so they don't become bigger problems in the future. After 4 years, when you do get issues with a road, it's too late then to use crack sealing. You have to go to an asphalt application, so that's when you'll see pothole application.
Sorry, I'm not an engineer, so you'll have to help me out here. I don't care about the age of the road. If there's a hairline crack near a catch basin or a crosswalk or somewhere on the road, why does it matter how old the road base is?
Just to be clear, Chair, because it's the type of fracture that you're seeing, so it's a very fine fracture that will typically show up in the first 4 years of the road. After that, you typically will see larger fractures where the road is starting to disintegrate. Maybe Ms. Duclos could add to that.
So it doesn't mean, through the chair, sorry, it doesn't mean that we do not deal with other deficiencies that a road would show. The specific answer to the inquiry dealt with crack sealing for reflecting cracking. So it's a program that we have in place. So after between 1 to 4 years, we monitor the roads that were recently resurfaced, and we deal with that minor fine cracking that appears usually between 1 and 4 years. After 4 years, if we have other deficiencies that could include a crack, we will deal with that, but not with the program that we have that is called crack sealing that deals with that immediate deficiency that shows up at the early time after the resurfacing is done.
Okay, so maybe I'm not asking the right question. Forget the new infrastructure. Forget the 4-year window. In areas of the city where the infrastructure is older than 4 years, where we recognize there's cracks, and I'm talking like sometimes they go from one end to the street to the other, where there's curbs, no curbs, depending on urban, rural areas. Why don't we see as much tar sealant as we used to? We used to see crews tape and drop the tar in the road. We're not seeing that anymore, and I wondered why, and I guess we got caught up in the new infrastructure. I'm out of the new infrastructure conversation, really on the maintenance side of things. Why aren't we doing it?
Chair, I think the councillor's asking about the effectiveness of crack sealing in an older road when you get that type of fractures. Maybe what we can do is take it away and meet with the councillor and give him a fulsome explanation of the program and what we would do in that instance.
Glad to take it offline, but I think it is an important issue as we face aging infrastructure, how we're fixing potholes and repairing streets.
Yeah, I think that if the councillor's okay with that, that'd be fine, but just given the lack of clarity or the lack of, it would be good if there was a follow-up memo, I think, to members of the committee to provide everyone the same information.
We'll take that away, Chair.
All right, thank you. Good?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. The next communication that was held is TRC 0419, Prince of Wales Bridge for Transit. I believe this was Councillor Kavanagh. So
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the response from staff on this. My question was related to a statement that was made by the mayor on September 24th, saying that the bridge was not going to be considered, and the note that I got back was that, yes, it still would be considered. It's very interesting because recently at a community meeting in Bay Ward, the MP for Ottawa West Nepean stated her enthusiasm and support for the Prince of Wales Bridge becoming available for LRT. And she stated that there is a caucus, a national capital caucus of MPs who share this enthusiasm. I just didn't see that in this report. I want to know what the ongoing talks are with the federal government, because if there are local MPs on both sides of the river who support this effort, why is it being delayed so much? I think that it's a very passionate issue for many people here in Ottawa. They see that bridge and it's not in great shape, yet it's an excellent opportunity to increase transit with our neighbors across the river. They share our roads too, so it helps us. When I bike to work and I'm looking at all those cars coming the other way, I'd say about 70% of them are from the Quebec side, and they have no choice but to drive because there's very little transit options for them. So this is an opportunity, and I want to know what the conversations are with this regional caucus to move this up.
Chair, Our response is based on what's in the TMP and what the council has approved. I'm not privy to some of the political discussions. So this is in our long-term plan, and you were asking about, it came up, this issue came up because of the STO study, and I've had discussions with Councillor Fleury, and he's asked that the STO's consultant and their team come to committee to talk about their study, and they will do that in the spring. They're not ready yet to present to us, so you will get the details as to why they chose Portage as their connection rather than Prince of Wales. Now, Prince of Wales Bridge is another facility for a different purpose than the STO's, which was from the west to the two downtowns.
Well, there's a lot of people that are commuting that are heading west for sure, and this bridge is something that would connect to the LRT, and with the extension of Stage 2 and eventually Stage 3, that would take them to Canada, because a lot of these people are going to the high-tech jobs in Canada and the West End. It's, you know, and D&D, we already know the parking situation there. That's in Bayward at Moody Drive. And it's pretty clear that we need more transit for both sides of the river, and we need to work together. When I heard this being stated at a public meeting in Bayward, that the MP is talking about a total commitment on this, it doesn't strike me that it's getting, that it's coming into our, we're on our radar. We're not, it's not being reflected here. And I recognize that you're considering it a political decision, but from what I understand, this is a commitment that this is a member of government who is saying that this is something that is enthusiastically supported. So I wanted to see how that was reflected, and it just contradicted what the mayor had said. Is there future conversations at the federal level? You were talking about STO, but what conversations are there at the federal level for this?
Councillor, I'm not sure that Ms. Chee is in a position to comment on political discussions that may or may not be happening, but perhaps just so that everyone around the table is on the same page, what is the status of the bridge in our TMP?
The status of the use of the bridge, it is identified for future, it's not part of the affordable plan. But we are doing the TMP review, we're doing the updates, so we will revisit these issues. But it was an affordability issue at the time, in the 2013, so this was not part of the affordable plan, but it's been still identified and tagged as a future longer-term need.
So, Councillor, I would suggest that given that answer, if this is something you want to pursue, you should pursue that through the TMP discussions, which have begun and are ongoing. And if the Member of Parliament for Ottawa-West Nepean believes that she can get the federal investment to bring this bridge to reality, then I would encourage her to go out and get the money.
Yes, I hope we can do that.
Thank you very much. Are there any notices of motions? Oh, I apologize. Apparently there is a public delegation on the bridge. Mr. Jeans, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm glad to hear Ms. Chee's answer, because I think it's essential that we keep the options open for use of this bridge in the TMP. The bridge and rails were in good condition when they were acquired by the city. The piers certainly need work, but they've been there since 1881 and carrying very heavy loads until 2001. It's essential that the rails not be removed. Even if a recreational use is contemplated, that could be done the way that Gatineau did for the same age bridge over the Gatineau River, where it was possible to pave between the tracks and in addition cantilever a pathway at the side of the bridge so that it was not prevented also using that bridge for rail. I was on the committee, the Gatineau committee for Rapibus when they did their original study, and their final report said that Rapibus could connect to the Ottawa LRT via the Prince of Wales Bridge or other bridges if required. And I don't see that keeping this bridge for possible transit extension of the Trillium Line is in conflict with STO's plans for light rail from Aylmer to downtown Hull and Ottawa, because those certainly would be using other bridges, whether Portage, Chaudière, or Rebuild Alexandra, it doesn't really matter. But the thing is that STO riders who could come across the Prince of Wales Bridge would mostly be traveling west or south. And I don't agree with the idea that the Bayview station and trains could not handle that kind of traffic. In fact, Bayview has already been built to facilitate large transfers between the Trillium and Confederation lines, and I don't see that being incompatible with that future use. I do have concerns about Lyon Station. It's a very deep station. It only has escalators in one direction, and I think that once we see heavy rush hour traffic in both directions at Lyon, we're probably going to have bigger problems there than have been mentioned by the mayor or others in connection with potential transfers at Bayview. Capital Railway currently owns the track over the bridge. It is a railway still, and they have the technology, should it be decided at some point in the future to use it, because it's certainly suitable for the type of diesel light rail operation with single track and passing sidings, which is contemplated anyway for the foreseeable future for the Trillium Line. I will also mention that the NCC Interprovincial Transit Study, which was conducted with the participation of the cities of Gatineau and Ottawa, did recommend that the bridge be retained for future transit use. So I certainly want to see an extensive discussion of this in the forthcoming TMP, and hopefully the priority will be raised from what was in the last TMP. Thank you.
For Mr. Jeans?
Just a comment.
Very quickly.
Yes, Mr. Jeans, I happen to agree with you on Bayview, so let's wait for STO's consultant to come to this committee, present what the city's provided, because I'm also concerned in terms of what OC and the city's provided to the consultant, but that will all be aired when the consultant comes to this committee.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Jeans. There are no other items on the agenda. Are there any notices of motions for future meetings?
I think, Chair, we had Beachburg-Walkley lifted.
Pardon me?
Beachburg-Walkley IPD.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. So, notice start of negotiations to acquire the Beachburg and Walkley rail corridors. Ms. Chi, Councillor Menard has a question.
Thank you so much, Chair. Just very quickly, I'm happy to see this happening, that the negotiations would start. What is the process within negotiations? Then I'll just have a comment about potential uses in the future. So just my two questions are the status to acquire them and the process for that, and then the potential use in the future as an LRT corridor. Is that being considered in the purchase of this corridor?
Well, Chair, for the first question as to the status, this is just to inform Council that there was an informal notification that that CN would be dispensing with this, but there's no formal notice of discontinuance just yet, so we have to wait for that. So this is just to inform you that something's happening, and maybe we don't know when, but that staff would be ready to go out and negotiate. So that's one. And for the uses, we don't identify anything yet, but it's it would be for a transportation corridor. There may be some interim uses, but it really depends, because this project right now, this corridor is not in our rapid transit network. So again, we will review all of that and its priority in context of the whole network as part of the TMP review, if we acquire the corridor.
Okay, I would just, I guess, just a comment then. This potential corridor could represent a very low-cost, high-capacity rail corridor for Ottawa in the future. given the area that it goes through and the connection to the west of Ottawa. And so I just want to make sure we're not ruling that piece out, that it is something we should be looking at as a surface rail option in conjunction with how the baseline BRT is potentially unfolding. This could be a replacement option. And so I know there's folks that are looking at this rail corridor as a real potential boon for Ottawa in the future that would serve the population further south of our current east-west LRT line. That would make connections into the west end of Ottawa. So I just want to keep that on the record and hope that we look at that in our future TMP. I can send you some documents I've received as well about the potential use of this. So, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor El Shantiri.
Just
has some questions.
This corridor, it's been, I know Councillor Menard maybe doesn't know the history of it, but right now it's still owned by the CN. Am I correct? The bed.
That's
because
correct.
they took the track out. And now the CN lease it out to a group, user group, as we speak. So the only thing we have, and we had asked all along for this corridor to maintain within the city because it is in our master transportation plan for future use. And that's still on the record. We need to discuss it in our master transportation plan. Is that correct? Same as we just talked a little while ago about the bridge, the Prince of Wales Bridge.
This corridor is not identified in our rapid transit network currently in the 2013 TMP, but as we noted in the IPD that, long linear corridors like this don't come up very often. So we would, the first thing is try to protect to keep it. And then we would also analyze, yes, we do see it from our network, we do see that this does provide some transportation benefits. When and how would be something that we would need to look through as part of our TMP review.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Jeans would like to speak to this item. So, Mr. Jeans, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, I'm strongly in support of the city acquiring this when the opportunity arises, in particular with the track and any sidings, not just the land. This line was built to high standards for transcontinental trains. Most of the roads along the route are already grade separated. This was done at federal expense. There are at least 12 such road crossings. Most of the route is suitable for double track, and there are already some passing tracks. It was originally fully signaled by the NCC back in the 1950s, though the signaling is defunct on parts of the line except where it meets other rail lines. It was studied in the East-West LRT EA in 2006, but that study was suspended without a report when the North-South LRT was canceled, and the subsequent EA only looked at 4 options for a tunnel under downtown and did not keep open the consideration of the cross-city rail corridor. It links several business parks across the region. It potentially links all of the Stage 2 light rail and transitway routes that go to the south. It's potentially, and this has been discussed, part of a potential commuter rail service going as far east as Castleman and as far west as Arnprior. It was recommended in the 2007 Mayor's Transportation Study that it be retained as part of the transportation system. It is compatible with the technology that the city already has in Capital Railway of diesel light rail with passing tracks. Although it does meet via rail at 1 and possibly 2 points, the U.S. Federal Railroad Administration is in the process of changing the rules to allow lighter weight passenger trains on shared tracks. So the old prohibition of which would have created problems for the portion of connecting the Walkley and Beachburg lines across the Rideau River, that problem might in fact go away anyway. It also is needed to provide continued freight access to the NRC rail test facility at Uplands, and in fact, a new passenger car from Siemens, which Via Rail is planning to use in future, was just taken down there by rail just last week for testing in the testing labs there. It also provides the link to the Nylene factory in Arnprior, which would lose its rail access if this line is abandoned. And for that matter, it provides a rail access to Capital Railway's own facilities at Walkley Yard, which would also become isolated from the general rail network should the city not acquire these lines. So just going back again, this also should be considered, the future of this line should be considered with all the options in the Transportation Master Plan, and the city should not pass up any opportunity to acquire the corridor and the tracks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. In terms of the cost benefit of this, it seems to me there's a huge impetus to get rail to the West End, look at the Stage 3 LRT. Can you give me more information of what you've analyzed in terms of potential cost benefit in terms of cost-effective transit investment in Ottawa to the extension of where we're looking at Stage 3 as a potential versus this option?
Yes, Councillor, and through you, Chair. Back in 1996, the city looked at both commuter rail and light rail options for the future, and the city council decided, the regional council then decided in 1996 to proceed with light rail transit, rapid transit, and not commuter rail. But other cities have made other decisions, and most other cities, every other city in Canada that has light rail or even metros also has commuter rail. And at some point, there is an opportunity to combine that, particularly since we've made the decision to retain that technology for the foreseeable future for the Trillium line. So we've looked at a variety of options for providing a commuter rail type of service in from Canada, possibly farther beyond. This rail line is connected to another line already owned by the city, the corridor owned by the city, which goes out through Carp to the outskirts of Arnprior. And similarly, there have been extensive discussions with Via Rail in the past about the possibility of commuter rail service coming in from Castleman, Limoges, Var, Carlsbad Springs. All of that is a possibility that could be operated in future jointly with Via Rail, and maintaining these lines is an important part of that option, which I don't think we should walk away from, even though it's really a separate system from our Confederation Line light rail technology.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Jeans. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jeans. Okay, now I swear to God, we are at the end. There's nothing else on the agenda unless Councillor El Shanturi is going to cause some trouble.
No, but I think I want to clarify something we heard here time and time again. So there's two rail lines, one from Walkley to Beachburg, and the track's been off the line, and that's what we want to talk about. But there's another existing line still operate once a week to Arnprior. So we don't want to mix the two together. Am I correct? And they're both owned by the one to Arnprior is owned by the city and leased out to a private.
Yes, that's the Renfrew line, and it's being leased out to Nylene. Yes.
Just so we clarify both.
Perfect, wonderful. Are there any notices of motions for future meetings? No. Are there any inquiries? Any other business? Wonderful. Are we adjourned? Thank you. Our next meeting is Wednesday, December 4th, where we will discuss, I'm sure, many things, including the budget.